session. Dr. Dalene Duvenage is a lecturer in intelligence studies at Mercyhurst University, and she's also an honorary senior research fellow at the Buckingham University's Center for Security and Intelligence Studies. She's been a practitioner in South Africa with a career that's been 32 years long and still continuing, and during which she was an intel analyst at the South African Secret Service, where her subject matter expertise was on African countries, so a continental focus. She has since she's been a training and development specialist, doing 8 years as a training and development specialist with South Africa's Intelligence Academy, and then also with the National Intelligence Agency, or what's now known as the domestic branch of South Africa's State Security Agency. After she left active service, she has spent 7 years with her own training and consulting company, and also with Absa Bank. And for the last 6 years, she's been a manager in intelligence analysis and security risk in the South African regulatory sector. Her most recent academic research has been focusing on the professional identity of security risk intelligence analysts in the private sector. So without further ado, Dalene will be the one to moderate the seminar on academia and national security agencies, focusing on independence, integrity, and self-censorship. And I'll hand over to her, and she'll make a more detailed introduction into Dr. Barry Zulauf. Dalene.
Thank you so much, Belani. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I will deal with this a bit later, but what you're doing here for Africa and the continent is really magnificent. And also great word of welcome to our scholars, our young scholars. Gee whiz, I'm glad to see they are scholars in Africa dealing with intelligence. So welcome to all of you. And then specifically today for Dr. Barry Zulauf. Barry has quite a illustrious career in intelligence in the US. He's currently the Recanati Kaplan Foundation Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and an adjunct professor at Mercyhurst University. So while we're talking about Mercyhurst, I'll be joining Mercyhurst in January. So I'm still working here from Pretoria. Looking forward to really become a scholar. I'm a bit tired of being a academic. Going into this actual academic field will be fantastic. And I'm doing it with one of the universities where he's an adjunct professor. So in addition to Mercyhurst, Barry is also at the James Madison University. That's also one of the major universities providing a functional intelligence education in the US, and then of course Georgetown University, which is one of the elite schools dealing with national security issues and intelligence and policy and decision-making support. He's also the president of the International Association for Intelligence Education, IAFI for short. I've been a member of IAFI since the start, Barry, actually in 2000. I've been to Mercyhurst where we actually started IAFI, I think a year or two thereafter. Barry's also, or Dr. Zulauf is also the Chief of Analytical Integrity and Standards in the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in the US, where he's evaluating analysis across the United States intelligence community as envisioned in the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Protection Act. He's also retired from active duty. He's a commander, and he has retired in October 2013 with a direct commission as an intelligence officer in the United States Naval Reserve. Barry, thank you for the opportunity that you give to us to engage with you on this very important matter. Then later on, the two respondents And excuse me, despite being an African, I still struggle sometimes with the pronunciation of our very interesting languages and surnames. But Asiimwe Solomon Muchwa is an associate professor at the Nkumba University in Uganda. I've been analyzing Uganda for that was about 20 years ago. Very interesting country with interesting politics. Now, Prof. Asiimwe is a member of the Security Studies and Analysis Center in Uganda and has served in expert advisory roles for the government there. He's currently Professor for Security Studies and International Relations at Nkumba University. His research interests have largely focused on intelligence oversight systems in Uganda. Very interesting CV there. And then our other respondent is Andrew Edward Tchie. He's a senior research fellow at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute in the UK, where he has been a senior research fellow and senior political conflict advisor for 12 years, where he has built up professional experience working in conflicted and fragile states. And his research focuses on 3 strands: security approaches in Africa, conflict resilience and prevention in Africa, and peace operations, with his special focus then on the Horn, the Sahel and Lake Chad Basin. Welcome then also to our 2 respondents. So without further ado, we don't have that much time. I'm going to share with you some issues that I identified that might help us, not that we need much guidance, but just touching a bit on Dalene, please enable me to share my screen. You be able to do that, or should I just go on? Okay, I'm hosting now. All right. All right, so the topic today is the academia and national security agencies with the subtopic independence, integrity and self-censorship. And being a practitioner myself and a scholar, so academic, as I said previously, and I think many of you in the call also are in the same position, we have felt this very close to our heights, and we have many times struggled with, are we independent? How do I deal with integrity in very difficult political circumstances? And then, of course, also the issue regarding self-censorship. And I'm still catching myself quite a few times applying self-censorship, even in my Twitter account. The complexities that we have regarding this issue is that it is difficult to speak truth to power in democracies. And I think Barry will tell us how difficult that is in democracies such as the US and the Anglophone countries where there's some sort of democracy, but it might be dangerous in non-democratic countries. And I see specifically more recently in Turkey, countries like Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria now more recently, but also in my own country. It might be dangerous not only for your position, but also endangering your life. I think we can, we might get back to some examples that each of you might have experienced. And then also the other complexity is that every country and every government actually can define national security in whatever way they want to. They can prevent academia from even researching, giving them access to information, even historic information. So national security in a non-democratic country, or even countries that might want to say that they are democracies like South Africa, but we are more a hybrid democracy than a real established democracy, is that national security is whatever the ruling elite feels it is. And politicization of intelligence is multidimensional. It's a problem throughout the world, even in America, but I think even more so in Africa. The politicization of intelligence also happens in all the phases of the intelligence process, whether it is what is it that you might that you need to investigate or to do research on. So your intelligence requirements are very restricted to specific need that the decision maker has, right through to the way in which you collect that information, also to and the one that I myself and Barry I think is more familiar with is in analysis. How do we prevent? Is it preventable to for the political decision makers to actually make a choice on whether they're going to believe you, whatever you're saying, or even tone that down? So this is multidimensional and an issue that is widely reported on in the scholarship. Then also what we have to understand, and I think we come from different places and different environments, is that the role of academia in societies differ in every country. And I would love, in this session for today, I would love to see universities or academia as part of civil society. So I'm going to group civil society with university and as academia vis-a-vis the intelligence community and the government. And to a large extent, it's actually relatable. To a large extent, the extent to which civil societies are allowed to participate and drive political freedoms and political growth and change development within a country is very much related to the way in which there is a democracy in a country. So in Africa, most of the countries, unfortunately, civil society is very limited in the way that they can execute their influence. And therefore, universities are then also, does only have a specific role that they are being boxed in, and therefore they are not allowed to become involved in national security. The other things is that, and I've touched here on Sandy Africa's book, and then Thijs van den Berg, an old colleague of mine who has wrote his thesis, and it's really worthwhile to look at it, looking at specifically now Thijs's case in terms of the political regime type, and then how intelligence fits into that, and then of course, how we as scholars can actually evaluate, analyze, and have an opinion about this. So weak states usually has defensive politics, and the way in which they deal with intelligence agencies are mostly for retention of power and self-interest. It's not for the people, although the constitution might say so, but it's for self-interest and protection of the political elite. This leads to a low capacity, a scholarly capacity in the intelligence, or even interest in the intelligence interaction in the country and in the region, but also poor performance. So you would see that where there is poor performance and low education and training environment processes within national security agencies in these countries where they are weak, you would also find that there would be very little, can I call it, willingness to talk to scholars about what might be wrong with the political system and how it can be rectified for the development of the country. So in these weak states, you will also find that there is no linkage with between the civil society, academia, and the national security intelligence, because there is just no way that a dictator or a semi-dictator would actually be willing to talk to the academia. In cases where they are willing to engage with academia, it might be to actually serve their purposes. So in these cases, academia might actually become a tool or a platform for a strengthening of that weak state's political elite. Now, the picture I show you here is, and this is the reason why I have this ripple effect on my slides is, and I want to come back to what I told Pilani, and that is that I think what is happening, not I think, I know what is happening with the African Intelligence Collective is that we are all starting, each one in your own little corner, wherever that is, and in which contact you might have in your own little pond, you are taking agency and you are creating a ripple effect. And I think we can't fathom at this stage, the 1st of October 2021, we can't fathom really what will be the outcome of discussions like we have today. This is the first time in an African context that we actually have people from all over the continent that look at these things, that try to understand where each of us come from, to try to frame, especially in this issue regarding academia and national security intelligence. And I'm going to close off before we give over to Barry. That is, if you toss a pebble into the ocean, it will sink forever without making a ripple. But if you throw that same pebble into a smaller pond, it will create waves that eventually wash ashore and touch all who walk there. And I think this is the message that I want to close off with today is, talking now for myself, we can become extremely cynical about the situation in Africa, about situation in our own countries, and how difficult it is to make an impact, whether it's in the academia or even within the national security framework. But remember that you have agency. You can take that pebble and throw it into the pond, and it will have a ripple effect. And each one of you, with the journey that you've started with African Intelligence Collective, will go on for quite a while, and you won't ever have an idea about what ripple effect this might have on not only national security quality, but also the intelligence environment and how we look and study this very important topic for our development. Thank you. Barry, so I'm giving over to you. You have about 20 minutes. You're more than welcome. I've not used all my time, so you're welcome to take over and share with us your insights on this topic.
Oh, super. Thank you, Dalene and Fulani. Thank you for the invitation. First, let me say, wearing my hat as the president of IAFI, we are the International Association for Intelligence Education. And some of you are members. I want to extend the invitation to others of you to join. You can go to www.ia.org, our brand new website. And you can also talk to those of us that are members. Sometime it might be nice to have an Africa chapter. We have a Europe chapter, we have an Australia chapter, we have several chapters in North America. Important to discuss with you because, like me, who have been in and out of academia and in and out of government service, and Dalene, and I don't, some of you may service or in and out of academia as well. We have to carry the same ethical responsibilities with us, the way we behave when we do our research and we do our writing, and speaking in academia should be on the same ethical basis as we do when we're in government service. And I imagine where you all teach is hiring intelligence professionals of the future, or at least some of your students are going to be going on and doing that. So we should be speaking and modeling to the younger people behind us about the appropriate way to behave. Although IAFI is an association for intelligence education, it's also an association that sort of carries the ethical torch for intelligence professionals. So let me put on my other hat, take off my IAFI hat and put on my government hat. Yeah, thanks Dalene for putting out the website there in the chat. I am appointed by the Director of National Intelligence. That is the Chief Intelligence Officer in the United States. Under the Biden administration, that person is also a member of the defense or state or treasury, appointed by the president, approved by the Congress of the United States. That gets to the point that Dalene was making earlier about being intelligent oversight being done in a democracy. We have a democracy, an elected president, an elected Congress. They're the ones that perform oversight, and the leadership of the intelligence community is done through someone who's appointed by them. At the moment, her name is, or not the moment, this administration's Director of National Intelligence is Avril Haines. It's the first woman who's been appointed to lead the intelligence services, plural, in the United States. I have an appointment directly from her, in addition to my other roles as the analytic ombudsman of the intelligence community. So that's the authority that I'm speaking to you with. And that office here in the United States, I don't know if there's a parallel quite for that in other countries. When I speak, I like to suggest that it is a useful function. I'll tell you what it does. I'll give you one good example. And I'll also make a case in the places where it is possible to have a statutory legal basis for the rules that have to do with analytic tradecraft. I sent some reading out ahead to Falani, which I hope he has shared with you all. So I won't put it up on the screen. If any of you didn't get it, I'll retransmit all of these. The first is the legislation, the law passed by the Congress that governs the intelligence community in the United States. The initials are IRTPA. IRTPA. It's the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. That sets up the Director of National Intelligence. It created the National Counterterrorism Center, other sorts of structures in the current intelligence community today. I'm not going to talk about that, but I am going to talk about 3 provisions of the law. And I recommend something like this for organizations. Countries might not have the ability to do this in their positive law, but if it can't be done in statute, I recommend putting this out in whatever kind of regulation is put in place, either by the government organizations, or you can make recommendations in your academic roles that this ought to be done. So the 3 provisions of the law that I'm going to talk about today, I'll talk about them as section 1017, that's 1017, 1019, and 1020. The reason I do that is if you want those, if you were attorneys or you're like reading law, you can go and look that up and see what the words actually are. 1017, first of all, is one that gets at the point of analytic integrity. And it's its own provision that talks about intelligence being required to provide alternative analysis. Alternative analysis is if you have a major conclusion that you've arrived at the end of your analysis, or your agency has a major conclusion that you arrived at the end of its analysis, that's fine. But this provision of the law also requires you, if you know that there's a minority view or a different opinion or a different analytic conclusion, it requires you under our system to include that in the product as well. Reason for this is to not give the customer the impression that there's only one possible conclusion. So the way this works is we'll look at a revolutionary situation perhaps, and the main conclusion may be that this is going to boil over into civil war with unrest throughout the region. Say the minority view might be, oh, actually, for X, Y, and Z reasons, we don't think that the revolutionary situation is going to get out of hand. It'll be controllable, and there's not a probable future that will result in civil war and unrest. Both of those stories need to go to the consumer. You can do the main conclusion first and maybe just a small conclusion later. That's hard to do. Most humans don't like to do that. If they already have a major conclusion in mind, they would rather just put that one out because they get invested in it. It requires integrity in order to be able to fairly represent what the other view is for the service of the decision maker. Section 1017 is a provision that lays out a whole series of what we call analytic tradecraft standards. Some of these are, and I gave information out to Philani to share with you all. They are spelled out in great detail in a piece of directive signed by the Director of National Intelligence. It's Intelligence Community Directive 203, or ICD 203. It's unclassified. You can find that on the web. It spells out what all these standards are. Some of them are sort of mechanical, having to do with proper sourcing, using credibility language, using probability language, some of the mechanics of how intelligence analysis is done. Another time we can talk about all of those, but I want to pull out the first two that are listed. One is the requirement to be objective, meaning unbiased, meaning intellectually honest. And the second is free of politicization. And I'll talk about what politicization means in our context in a second. Those are the two that I want to focus on today. Section 1020 is my own personal provision in the law. That's the legislative authority for an analytic ombudsman. Some organizations may have an ombudsman who's dispute individuals, labor issues. That's not what I do. I only deal with the provisions of analytic tradecraft in the law. And in particular today, I'm going to talk about objectivity and politicization. It's most of what I pay attention to. Now, let me say just a word about what politicization means. Not being political in law in the United States and in our interpretation and in the way we have adjudicated these inquiries over the years means not only partisan, as in intelligence analysts cannot shade their product in order to be pro-Democrat or pro-Republican, being policy neutral, that if you personally, as an individual, think that a particular government policy is not wise, you are not allowed as an intelligence analyst to shade your conclusions to suit your own preference. Also, you're not supposed to shape the intelligence that you provide in order to suit the policy preferences of a consumer. That is either the President of the United States, in our case, or any other consumer. What we're supposed to do is gather the intelligence, perform the analysis, reach the conclusions, and provide them to the decision maker, no matter what they say, whether the decision maker is going to be happy with that conclusion or not. And that's difficult to do. And I'll come back to this thought about being difficult to do. Dalene said it was difficult, and in some political environments, it may not be possible at all because of the closed nature or the non-democratic nature of the regime. I'll come back to that. This point about being apolitical and providing analytic conclusions to decision makers, even if they don't want to hear them, if it's to their perspective bad news, is the very reason why intelligence exists in governments as a function of state. We are not here, excuse me, we're not here to give good news to the customers. We're not here to give them what they want to hear. At least in the United States, I won't characterize other governments. You can think for yourselves. There are plenty of elements in the government that will give the president or the other consumers what he or she wants to hear. Intelligence exists for the purpose of saying, sir or ma'am, something bad is about to happen over there or over there. This is what we think is going to happen. I know this is not going to be favorable to the policy that you're pursuing in the area, but you need to know this. That's our purpose. That's why we exist. In the Western tradition, at least as far back as Sir Francis Walsingham, who was the professional intelligence officer serving Elizabeth I in England, that's been the function of intelligence. It's our core ethic. If we don't do that, if we don't provide the bad news when it's necessary, we put ourselves at risk of becoming irrelevant. The DNI, Avril Haines, has spoken about this in her confirmation hearing. She's spoken about it in interviews, that this is our core ethic, what we need to focus on. And this is what we should be teaching in our classrooms to students, that where possible, they need to push this. And I am having in the back of my mind what Dalene said about, in some cases that's difficult, in some cases that's possible. So let me turn over in the few minutes remaining to a specific example, a recent example. It's been published, and I think this was in the material that I sent to Dalene, of a case where exactly this happened in the intelligence community. And I, in my role as the ombudsman of the intelligence community, wrote a major report highlighting that in some cases, analysts themselves, in other cases, mid-level managers of analysts, in some cases, analytic intelligence leaders, all the way to the very top. And I mean the then Director of National Intelligence, the previous one, had suppressed intelligence for political reasons. I can go more into the details of the report later if anybody wants to know. Hopefully you've had a chance to read that. But in brief, what was going on is analysis here in the United States about whether the Russians were interfering in the US presidential election in 2020, or the Chinese were interfering in the US election in 2020, was subjected to politicization. On the one hand, because the president didn't want to hear it, evidence about Russia interference in the US elections was suppressed, by which I mean not allowed to be published, altered, conclusions changed, and what have you. And on the other hand, analysis about China interfering in US elections was overemphasized. Let me say that, partly because the president wanted to hear. Sorry, I just dropped my dropped my phone. Sorry. The president wanted to hear that, and also it turns out that some of the mid-level and agency managers also personally believed that to be the case. The difference wasn't demonstrable on the basis of analytic tradecraft. It was for partisan reasons, or for reasons of favoring or not favoring a policy that was being pursued by the then Trump administration. Now, I have to say here very quickly that I'm not talking about suppressing anyone's First Amendment rights. In the United States, the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech. We can be Republicans, we can be Democrats, we can belong to political parties, we're entitled to have opinions, we can vote for people, we're entitled to think and say in our private lives that this policy or that policy is bad or foolish or stupid. But what we are not allowed to do is put any of that into our intelligence analysis to shape the conclusions. And unfortunately, as the report that I issued, and it's public knowledge, it was released by our very helpful New York Times and Washington Post on the same day that it was issued to the Congress. Much of this is spelled out. I'll give you one very pithy example. This is the kind of thing that we need to make sure our students who are going to be intelligence analysts don't ever do. One analyst who was looking at Chinese interference said to me, this is almost a direct quote, "I don't want my analysis going to the White House where that vulgarian, ill-mannered man, if anyone doesn't know the words, in the White House will use it to pursue policies toward China with which I personally disagree." Now, that's wrong on several levels. The analyst is entitled to that opinion, entitled to express that opinion, but not entitled to shape, or in this case, withhold intelligence just because he or she doesn't agree with how it might be used by policymakers. That put us in a very bad situation. So my role as the ombudsman is to investigate this. Analysts came to me with the complaint from 3 different agencies in the U.S. And said that this was going on. So I did an inquiry. I gathered documentary evidence. I did listening sessions with analysts from all the agencies. I got advice, legal advice, and academic advice from people who talk about analytic objectivity, about what ought to be done. And at the almost the very end, normally what I do is I brief the results to the top level leadership. In this case, it would have been the Director of National Intelligence. And then my job is basically done because the managers then take over and they make the changes. I don't have line authority to make changes. I just make recommendations. They always take my recommendations, though. I'm pretty proud of that. I do a good job of putting that together. So I was in a difficult position, I think Dalene would say, not an impossible position, but close to it. I work for the Director of National Intelligence. I had to go and see him face to face and tell him that my inquiry determined that he personally was in violation of IRTPA. He had personally suppressed intelligence. He had personally changed intelligence conclusions, and that was not right. I didn't know how that was going to work. I had a resignation letter typed up and predated and signed in my pocket. If he was going to try and fire me as a result of that, or try and suppress the report, I was going to beat him to it. I was going to resign. I will give him credit, even though I was showing him that he was in violation of the law. He wasn't happy, but he accepted it, and he said, "All right, well, we'll need to fix this." And we were working on the fixes when the U.S. election happened, and he left with the old Trump administration. I don't know how that would have played out. At the same time, the very, very end, just before the election, I was given a personal letter from the U.S. Senate addressed to me saying, "We want you to give a written report," something that I had never done before, and laid out in great detail all the things that they wanted to know. I could tell from the letter that they already knew what was going on. Some of the analysts or someone had gone to the Senate Intelligence Committee and told them what the answers were going to be. That's the way they phrased the questions to me. So that's why you see the written report, which I insisted on being unclassified, because I knew that it would become public record someday. And I also hoped that it would be a teaching tool that people can use as an example of how things had gone wrong and how they can get better. So I am still here. I am still employed. It was a difficult situation, but I got through the Director of National Intelligence, the one who left. I briefed the whole thing again to the new Director of National Intelligence. She accepted it. I briefed it to the Congress, and we're well on the way to putting fixes in place. So I think I overstayed my welcome a little bit, Dalene. Sorry, but let me stop there and see what else we have in mind for the session.
Thank you so much, Barry. We will give the respondents now a chance before I make some comments. Solomon, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson, for this. And I want to thank Barry for the wonderful presentation he has given us about the American experience. I don't know whether I'm audible. You're getting me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, when I listened to and also read the various documents that they shared with us, and hearing from what he has explained here, of course, I want to thank Felani for having come up with this idea, but I realize we are comparing incomparable situations. The system in America really has matured. Most of these issues he has explained can only happen in a democracy as strong as that of USA. When you look at the statement I just said, how he moved to the director of the director and he told him he was mismanaging the situation, and he had a resignation in the pocket, but he never resigned and he was never chased. That can only happen in under a situation where there's deepened democracy, where there's rule of law, where there's protection by law, legal protection, and where there's job security. Really, the whole thing here is the rule of law. Do we have a legislation that protects the intelligence community? Do you have a legislation that protects the academia or anybody who wants to participate, as our theme says about self-censorship? Of course, most of those issues, we will just be learning that from the best experience of America, but I don't see whether we can compare them with our own situations here. But the need, things we hear, like in most of the strong principles of intelligence, are still taken seriously. They need to know protection of intelligence, central to control. People still take them very fundamental. And when you talk about national security, in our parts of the world, especially in this continent, it is first of all contestable. When you talk about national security, people are asking whose security, whose national are you talking about? We have not yet believed into what we are calling national, as America could have. America, for them, they can believe in national security, and everybody will see security is a common good. But here, national may mean protection of a regime. And so, and therefore security for a long time, of course, the intelligence systems we have here, they are so core to the security that they are not even allowed to be overseen by parliament or even by civil society because they are close to protection of the regime. And so most of the people who may be manning these agencies are well educated, by the way, in our country. They know the danger of discussing or managing issues. We have gone ahead to write. I have written quite a lot on security, but we have to mind what you're writing, or even when you're going to interview someone, we tell you, be careful, don't mention my name. Therefore, self-censorship is very, very close here. Why? Because security, national security or intelligence is taken to be a very central, a core sector to the protection of a regime, not just protection of a country, but a regime. So we find that most of these things, what is important here is, for example, in Africa, the intelligence sector, of course, traditionally has been known like that. And the intelligence services on the continent have been misused for personal or group interests. So what is needed first is deepening democracy, rule of law. And the practice of accountability, of course, I can say, yes, there's a semblance of some of these things opening up. I can give examples of Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, Botswana. Yes, yeah, there's some semblance of opening up, but still, when it goes to issues that can challenge the stability of a regime, then you may be questioned, you may be asked, why are you writing such a thing? And some of the things we write, we have written, but we don't publish them because of fear of the repercussions of that what will happen. So I have liked the example we are getting from America, but what I'm trying to say, this is a given. I don't see whatever Barry has said is expected in such a country. But I was only concerned that a country like America can still also have threats of politicization. Like one of the documents that that was shared with us, I found where an interview, I think an interview of a former director of national intelligence, who was explaining how the former president of America was sort of trying to politicize intelligence. So I wanted to know from Barry how, what helps the intelligence community to withstand these pressures? What is this that the intelligence community does to ensure that they have actually managed to tell truth to power without fear or favor? Is it the culture? Is it the law? What is it? I would want to know that, because here, if you moved and told truth to power to the leader, you'll be arrested. That's a fact. Or you lose a job. Okay, if you are a director general, or you lose a job then. So there's no protection. Maybe you would want to learn from America how, for example, him as a director, what could have made the other person he went to meet, how come he could not fire him? So what is this? Is this the issue of law? And this is what maybe we're lacking here. So speaking truth to power is difficult in Africa, of course, and defining national security is also difficult. We have not yet agreed on what is national security in most of these countries. Politicization of intelligence is the order of the day, because, as you said, intelligence is very central in protecting the regime. So I think I will stop there. But I want to ask Barry to help me to understand what we can pick from the experience of America, in as far as the intelligence chiefs or security officials, what makes them tell truth to power and leaders accept.
Thanks for that. Even though we have politically appointed leaders like the Director of National Intelligence appointed by the President, they have usually been intelligence professionals themselves, either in uniformed service or as civilians. Mr. Ratcliffe, who was the DNI in the last year of the Trump administration, he had been a congressman, so he wasn't a complete novice. But he wasn't an intelligence professional. Everybody else in the community were trained intelligence professionals. And as I talked about the analytic standards, that's what we get trained to do. We spend our lives doing it that way. And the main bulwark in the U.S. system is President Trump used the phrase the deep state, and he wanted to make that a curse word, as if that's something bad. The deep state, or permanent government, whatever you may say, intelligence professionals who are here throughout different presidential administrations. They're the ones themselves who carry this core ethic about objectivity and avoiding politicization in themselves. That's what they're taught, that's how they're trained, and that's how they're supposed to behave. What was going on over the past several years in the United States, and it's still going on, right? Even though I think you may have said the United States is a mature democracy, we're in a bad situation right now because we're very polarized. You know, two groups of people who don't like each other at all, and think the other group is not only the other side but evil. And that polarization in society has soaked into the intelligence profession, and that's why we saw the bad behaviors that was highlighted in the report. And for the lesson to give for other political systems that aren't mature in the same sense that the US political system is mature, teach the value of the ethic to people. Dalene mentioned throwing a pebble into the ocean, it won't do anything. Theoretically, if you throw enough pebbles into the ocean, you'll fill it. So if you teach people, young analysts, young students, one at a time, eventually there'll be enough of them. Eventually they'll rise to the top. They'll be the leaders, and they'll accept this. It may take a while, but that's the way forward, I think.
Okay, maybe the other question I would want to Barry to help us on is the position of intelligence vis-a-vis the executive or government. How close should the intelligence be with the executive? Should intelligence inform policy or should it be neutral? And how have they gone around this in America? Should intelligence inform policy or should remain neutral?
Oh, that's the other question in chat or something. There's actually a long debate in the United States about whether intelligence should be like that together with policy or whether there should be a gap. The most famous person that talked about there needing to be a gap was Sherman Kent, S-H-E-R-M-A-N-K-E-N-T. I happen to believe that intelligence needs to be produced in one realm over here, and it needs to be objective. It needs to not be put together as a means of advocating one kind of policy or another. And there cannot be a close relationship with policymakers, because otherwise the intelligence officer will, being a human, try to please the policymaker, or it's an uncomfortable situation if you have to give bad news to the policymaker all the time, and the intelligence officer who tries to match up with that policy preference is going to end up consciously or unconsciously shading intelligence. So I think there should be a gap. There is a other school of thought that I don't share, other intelligence professionals do share this, that you can't be a good intelligence officer if you aren't closely involved with a policymaker, understanding what's going on in that policymaker's world, what are the important issues, what's upcoming, what are his perspectives, and provide him intelligence as sort of a service rather than just a one-way good. I think that's very dangerous. In general, that's very dangerous, because you can get sucked into the policy making realm, which is where intelligence should not be.
Okay. Yeah, so I hope I still have a minute. And that is the problem, Madam Chair, in Africa, especially even in my country. The intelligence seems to be closer to the presidency. And as you know, I think in other countries like that, the intelligence is even sits in the midst of near the president. It is in the executive, it is the president. Even Uganda, it is the president who appoints the Director General alone, not without parliament. He sacks him as he wants. And even reporting, they report direct to the president. They can only report to other ministers if the president wishes so. So here, the intelligence is still closer with the executive. And that's why the challenge is that therefore, the academia, we have a problem that you are dealing with this, you're going to write about a sector that is closer to the president, closer to power. The president is so powerful in Africa.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, unlike your country where, but here the president can actually, if he wants, can even overturn the parliament, if so wishes. So it is an issue of life and death, as you are writing. So it is a big, I like this topic you brought, but we need to find out how do we go around it to ensure that we are publishing, we are writing, and we're telling truth.
Right.
Other than hiding behind around, because we continue because of fear. So that's why I said, yeah, what we require is actually rule of law to ensure there is deepening democracy first. But all these things we're talking about, if we don't deepen democracy, we cannot achieve an open intelligence. We cannot achieve an open publication on intelligence. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Solomon. I think I would love to give Andrew a chance to respond because I think he will most probably go further with some of these issues before I then respond. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for taking the time to be here today. Just to say quickly, I'm no longer with RUSI. I left RUSI about a year ago, so I'm with the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. So I want to try and split some of my comments in two parts. First being the African context, because we're obviously fresh talking about that. And the second being really about the actual notes itself, or should I say the paper itself. So a few things. I think, as was highlighted earlier, when we think about the African context, I think it's applicable, when we talk about intelligence, it's what is intelligence applicable to? And what I mean by this is, who is it connecting to? Who is it supporting in the African context? But also, to even go a step further, what is it trying to do to solidify that person's role within the nation or within the state itself? And as was said before, particularly in the African context, oftentimes it supports a particular regime, it supports a particular person, and the strategies that they believe, or should I say, their vision or goal of what they see as being true. So if you look at, for example, the Rwandan example, you see a very strong intelligence that is based upon some of the earlier things that happened in the 90s that has consistently grown to where it is now. And one could argue, actually, in fact, that probably Rwanda probably has one of the best intelligence systems or institutions outside of South Africa and others as well. If you look at Ghana, for example, where I'm originally from, you look at examples there during the Kwame Nkrumah regime or period, and you see the formation of an intelligence sort of group insecurity off the back of the British colonial background, but also with support and aid from India, Australia, and to some extent Canada and the UK as well. So again, what is it shaping? How does it shape? And how has it been shaped over the last few decades? And I think with that in mind, it then brings you into the question of how security is grounded in national, local, and then community levels of understanding. And what I mean by that is, at the sort of presidential level, it supports the regime, it supports the groups. At the local level, it might be used to suppress. And that situation is very different from the Norwegian model where I'm based now, the UK model where I've lived, the South Sudan model, for example, where I spent time, and how intelligence was driven by different people on the ground. When I talk about the community level, how community leaders, but also various youth can feed into that intelligence indirectly, not knowing, but also feed into a regime, or, for example, feed into a local unit. I'm thinking here of the Upper Nile, Malacca, where I was based with the UN mission, and the constant battles that you would have back and forth, and how youth in the local community were feeding information to both rival groups. And so how does that play out on that level as well? I talked earlier about intelligence and how it's often used to hold power, or in some cases, how it can hold a particular regime in place. But I also think it's different when you have a conflict setting. And then when you stabilize a conflict, when you're trying to sustain a particular person or regime in place, or you could argue peace building processes, to, okay, post peace building elections, and how that is implemented during those periods as well. So I think it's almost like it's a multifaceted, multidimensional aspect when we talk about intelligence in Africa. And again, I don't want to draw the assumption that most people do, but when we talk about Africa, we have to also remember, even within East, North, South, Central, West, the dynamics are very different. Again, if you look at intelligence in West Africa and how that has emerged, particularly in Nigeria, places like Ghana, Ivory Coast, compared to how it was done in Southern Africa, it is a very different model that arises. And so I think that, not to point fingers, but that sort of imported versions, we have to be very mindful of. I read a paper this morning which reminded me of this, and it talked about intelligence that was used to support terrorism in Nigeria. And the idea being here is that the Nigerian government had imported models from the UK on counterterrorism and some from the US to try and use these as models to suppress terrorism in the northeastern part of Nigeria, in this case, Borno State, where Boko Haram operated. But what it did do is it didn't necessarily help with reintegration and other issues, but what it did, it didn't build the trust that was necessary in the African context, particularly in the Borno State context, to be able to integrate these former terrorists into communities. So what I'm trying to say is if we just import these models and take these models and we don't think about how, in many cases, how this idea or notion of intelligence is used on the ground, then we can actually cause further damage and problems as well. The other thing I want to draw our attention, I think Solomon mentioned this, which is really about the institutions, and this brings me really to the paper. It's about the institutions and how they govern. And one could argue that many or several of African states and their institutions, where, for example, maybe in the US and in the UK model, and I'm thinking here of Norway and other places, the institutions exist without the leader, without, as it were, the formations of political parties. They're independent to some extent, but they're able to hold the system or people accountable. In the African context, you don't have that. And so when we are thinking about and not to pick on the comment, but when we're saying, okay, we should train up young intelligence officers, I'm reminded of how some of the young intelligence officers, for example, in Uganda, might have contributed to supporting Idi Amin in those earlier days. Yes, the notion and idea was good if we were able to train and equip and whatnot, but also if we're training and equipping into a system where there are no institutions that are that can support the overall country to move forward beyond just the leader, then we are reinforcing a regime that actually will do more damage than good. Just to quickly come down and hopefully the last 2 minutes, just not to take up any more time, I think the not necessarily concerns, but things that I wanted to draw that I was didn't sit right with me, particularly the presentation, but also the first thinking was, where did this sit when it comes to the body of academia, but also the body of literature that is out there? And so from an academic point of view, but also policy, because I think I maybe not as a policy as many on this panel, but I think when thinking about these, I'm thinking about where is the analytical framework that is being used? What are the systems? And I don't want to use the phrase lessons learned per se, or what is it, the one that is buzzing around at the moment, theory of change. But I think it needs to be, intelligence must always be rooted in some theoretical position. Where do we sit? How do we view these things? What are the key things that shape, and where is the gap here? Where are the core arguments that lay there? And I think with Barry, I hope you don't mind me saying, I couldn't see that here. That was something that I struggled with. And I think with that in mind, it's not difficult, not necessarily to import it, but it's difficult to see how it can also support, if not, examples can be drawn to be used in the African context here. I think with that in mind, it could have been a little bit more clearer from slide 345, incorporate more analysis, so justification of where the analysis is coming from, maybe not the extent of research design per se, but again, where is that analytical thinking and mindset? And then I was a little bit confused about the majority minority views and how that played out and how that, I guess, shapes one's thinking and the relevance of the work that has been done. And then the last point really is the sort of, what I wasn't clear about was whether slide 9 was some sort of SWOT analysis. How was that done and the thinking behind that as well? And I'll leave it here because I know time is not.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Barry, do you want to respond?
Sure, yes. Very, very helpful, Andrew. Thank you. So you're right. The paper didn't go into the theoretical construct on which it rests. It's relatively simple. Critical thinking and scientific method. Scientific method which applies in the physical sciences, ought to apply in the social sciences, and ought to apply in intelligence analysis as well. It is, I thought I said this in the written report, maybe not, that what was really the problem here was we had intelligence analysts and some of their managers starting with the answer, then going to find the evidence that supports that answer and ignoring everything else, and then producing products, which is exactly the reverse of how social science, how the scientific method is supposed to work. Scientific method is supposed to start with, you have data, either that you have already captured or that you're in the process of collecting, and you may formulate hypotheses as you go along. Some of those come from the data, some of them might be suggested from elsewhere, it might be suggested by management, and you use those hypotheses to test, or use the data to test the hypotheses. You'll eliminate the hypotheses that aren't supportable, and you come out in the end with, if you're really good, you'll come out with one hypothesis at the end that the evidence supports, and that's what goes into your report. That's scientific method. That's the way it's supposed to happen. I think you mentioned alternative analysis. Alternative analysis is, it picks up midway in that process. You started with 4 hypotheses. You eliminated 2 of them because the evidence didn't support it, or the other one was not logical or something like that. You come out with 2. One is mostly supported by most of the evidence. That becomes your major conclusion. But if the other one is still probable or possible, according to the way our law operates and the way this theory works in practice, you are required in your product to talk about the existence of that alternative view, that minority view, and describe it fairly. You can't just make a straw man and say, this is what we think, and those other idiots in the other organization next to us, who obviously aren't very well trained, they think this. You're not allowed to do that. It has to be fairly presented. That's how that goes forward. And a SWOT, and I'm not sure what the SWOT analysis question was you were asking me.
No, it wasn't a question per se. It was just saying I wasn't sure whether your slide 9 was designed to be some form of a SWOT analysis, where you're assessing based upon various different options.
What does slide 9 say?
It's a term that is used in conflict resolution. So the idea here being you're trying to understand what is the sort of risks, what are the opportunities.
I know the term. I don't have the slides in front of me. What's on slide 9?
It says evaluating opportunity analysis, and then it says poor, fair, good, excellent. So yeah. I guess it was more how you categorize things, how you see things. Because again, you talked about obviously research design, and just quickly, I mean, I think it's important to also highlight with all of these things, intelligence is based upon some form of bias. What I mean by this is we're inherently human, so we all have an inherent bias about how we see or perceive the world. So right. Even though yes, you can have a ranking of poor, good, excellent, but even beyond that, again, in the African context, if you speak to most intelligence officers, oftentimes they will have a predefined notion of how they see things, like you said, their own world.
Yes. But
some form of analytical frameworks, of several of them, allow, and this is something that I try and do, allows an intelligence officer to understand, not just like you said, the data, because even with data now, you can find data that inherently confirms your own findings. So we need to go beyond that and think, okay, actually, how do we move to more of the fact-based analysis? And I don't mean academic per se, but again, bring in some of the good groundings that are in academia that can also help support some intelligence work as well.
Yeah, that we struggle with that every day. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, can I just come in here, Andrew? So it actually boils down to, and I think this is how everything. The difference between the US and Africa, and I hate also to connect Africa as one whole. because it's so true. We are totally disparate on so many issues, is that remember, America has had a chance, or has had 70, nearly 80 years of developing intelligence sciences, intelligence discipline. And we're only just starting now in Africa. In a certain sense, we can leapfrog, learn from them. But I think also that we have to, and this is why I love your question, is, and this makes me very excited, is the kind of questions we should be asking in terms of what is our frame that we look for. And I love your whole comparative view of the different intelligence, can I call it culture, / models within the different countries or regions in Africa. And I think that needs to be written down. This needs to get out and be published. So it's very important, Andrew, that that we start with that process. The other issue that you raised, Andrew, also very speak close to my heart, and that is, to what extent does intelligence serve the nation vis-a-vis the ruler? And I always, you know, when people get too cynical, well, I also get too cynical about the future of intelligence in Africa, I always show them, go and look at what is happening in Romania with regard to intelligence studies. So you all know the history of Romania, but now they actually have a university that focuses on intelligence studies. This university is very closely related to the national security intelligence environment. But man, can they write critical papers and do presentations on what is actually wrong there in terms of oversight, etc. Now, of course, again, we need to see it in the context of the political situation and how democracy has now deepened to a large extent in the last 20 years in Romania. But I think the moment you start losing faith in where we are going with intelligence in Africa, go and look in terms of, you know, what is happening in Romania. I also, just before I give Brian and Anne a chance to speak, in terms of what Solomon said, is how do we go about publishing when our lives might be at stake? And this is, I think, one of the questions, Dalene, that the AIC must, and we as scholars and academia must talk about. And this is, currently, most of you are more in the political science kind of environment, which makes it actually more safe. So you can bring in focus on intelligence and culture, etc., and policy making, policy decision making. And if I can then relate to what is happening in Romania and in the US, is gradually intelligence in Africa would become its own sort of discipline. But we have to start from somewhere. We have to stand on the shoulders of giants already. And that is, so where you come from, Andrew, specifically in terms of conflict resolution, you know, by all means, use the safer options or the safer channels to start publishing. And in this way, people will start recognizing and seeing what we are doing, and we can push the debate a bit more open. Dalene, you wanted to? Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to cap off some stuff before the Q&A opens up properly. And the first aspect, which was highlighted, especially because to sort of maintain some thematic, you know, integrity with the direction of our discussion, is something that's been highlighted latently, is that this issue of whether intelligence is institutionalized. Solomon raised it as far as the location within presidency offices, and this really comes to the very fact that it has been highlighted that the intelligence agencies in Africa, how many of them actually exist as organizations, and how many of them are enshrined in constitutional orders? Because I think that that's where some of the sort of aspects leak out. Sorry. someone. Okay, there we go. So from that perspective, you have Sandy Africa actually pointing out that in Africa, there's intelligence organizations and then there's security services. And what that means is that some of these agencies are primarily predicated to perform covert action, while in some countries, some intelligence organizations have that sort of analytical function. And sometimes to sort of make reference to what Andrew has said about, that sort of colonial background, the way that it influenced bureaucratic manifestations. For example, in South Africa, you can see how the whole colonial apartheid era instills a different kind of bureaucracy, which is really Western in format. You can see something similar in Zimbabwe, where before independence, there did exist a central intelligence organization. It just got repopulated by a different government. And this condition of permanence that we are sometimes applying in some other parts of Africa, certain countries have services which emerge from the previous colonial policing aspect. So you have this very close relation with more policing and more monitoring than actual analysis. And so therefore, you will find that when the state intelligence function, you often find it being quoted in the office of the president and cabinet. But you then very, very quickly realize that, and this is actually part of the reason why this conversation is titled Academia and National Security Agencies, because those security services, when they need to have a strategic intelligence assessment, what happens is they have ad hoc academic engagements. So you have these academics being pulled from political science, from sociological aspects to come and do research to deliver some form of a strategic intelligence assessment. And then you have these researchers contracted at government level or within the office of the president. And what they are delivering is in effect a strategic intelligence assessment, but it's just unstructured. And so you have these academics not knowing that they are performing a much heightened intelligence function, but then they are. And when that happens, that immediately has an impact on the integrity of that academic and the rate at which they're involved, because they will claim that they're there doing academic research, but they're functioning as an intelligence professional without knowing. And then secondly of all, this opens them up to an extensive form of confirmation bias. And when speaking to some people who've been appointed in government research roles at this level, where there's this conflation between intelligence and academic research, you'll find that the main reason why they self-censor and so on and so forth is that, as Solomon made reference to about the closeness of this kind of subject area to regime security, one academic has explicitly told me that the reason why we don't take this conversation academically is mainly because of the asymmetric aspect of it. If I start talking academically and interrogating and developing insights, I may actually expose to some extent the modus operandi of these agencies. And asymmetrically speaking, when they're looking at the power interrelation internationally, some agencies are more capable than others in terms of sort of deducing and now finding out strategic intent. So without further ado, please, Dalene.
Thank you, Belani. Very interesting. Anne, ladies first. Your question, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay, good.
Yes.
I want to thank the presenters and those who have responded so far. And I want to take the chance to throw back my concern to Barry and my point of
We can't hear you, Anne.
Sorry, Anne.
Has been changing, and so where. And if you look at, can I redo?
And you're breaking.
Yeah, maybe put the question into chat.
Yeah, and if you could please type the question into chat and I'll try and read it out for you.
I can hear you well. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now.
Yeah, you come and go. Let's try again, Anne. Otherwise, please type.
Okay, my concern is that the conduct of security and the concept of security has been changing. And so should the conduct of intelligence to reflect the people and not the state. When you look at Africa, you realize that factors like globalization have unfortunately created security threats or may be fearful of, and oftentimes these threats have been politicized, including issues to do with migration, issues to do with ethnicity, and state collapse. And using America as a democratic state, but also as one of the greatest funders, especially in international development. How does the US hold accountable and democratic regimes in Africa to which they throw monies in form of international development, but which money is used to sponsor intelligence, and intelligence that is used to crack down on civil society and particularly the academia? How do they hold them accountable? I submit to you.
Difficult question, Barry. So in terms of, you know, the reality vis-a-vis the ideal situation. So the Americans have quite a ingrained intelligence culture. How do you expect the same kind of ethics from non-democratic countries in Africa? And as Anne said, sometimes being these governments or regimes are propped up by Western countries. How do we, is there a way in which the US can then demand better accountability, or how do we play? Is this relevant in our discussion today? Over to you, Barry.
Okay, so I can't speak to the way we hold other countries accountable who use intelligence aid and assistance that we give them for suppression. That's really outside of what I can speak to. I can talk about ways in which we have modified our approach, both in terms of the people that we bring into the intelligence community to work and the kinds of topics that we focus on. And what I would hope that we're able to do is model how intelligence can be used to meet shifting requirements. If you were to look at all of the annual national intelligence strategies, NIS, they're unclassified. They go back a number of years into the 90s at least. They used to always say Russia, Russia, Russia. Then for a while, they always said terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. This one, the one that's about ready to come out, because this is what the president ran on politically, is going to highlight climate change, global health, migration, those kinds of social issues. And the community is having to change to be able to meet those topics. We're also trying very hard to hire people to be more representative of America. The intelligence community used to be the same northeast of the United States from a handful of colleges and universities and overwhelmingly white. It's not the case anymore. We've been doing some hiring. And then in terms of what we expect our allies to do, I don't know that we or anyone close to me in my office can force other countries to do things, but we would hope to be a model to other services of how to behave ethically and how to be able to be responsive to the shifts of what the population needs from us.
Sorry, Barry, this was a very difficult question, and I think something that we can't really answer here, because there might be no real answer. But Anne, I think, you know, in terms of to what extent must oversight and intelligence oversight become a political instrument, might be a very good topic to research as scholar. So I'm going to throw back your own question to you and ask you to see to what extent this might actually help us better understand the intelligence dynamics in Africa. Brian, over to you.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of observations related to the discussion. One is the idea of an ombudsman. I think that that's an excellent idea. And one of the things that I want to bring to our attention is how over the decades, things have actually become a little better in the intelligence realm in Africa compared to the 60s and the 70s. Now you have processes for checks and balances in place. They're still nascent. There's still a lot of work to be done, but regimes in Africa are no longer pretending that these don't exist as they did in the 70s and the 60s. So that's an important evolution. One of the other things that I want us to take into consideration is that with regard to this evolution, a lot is changing. And it is our role as practitioners and even academics in intelligence to continue pushing for changes, to continue recommending changes that improve the conduct of intelligence and improve the conduct of intelligence in relation to people. So with that in mind, I want to say that even the United States, intelligence oversight only became so strong in the 70s, in the early 70s. That's when it really picked up. So intelligence is a work in progress. And even if there are so many other developed nations out there with very advanced systems for checks and balances, it behooves of us as people from the continent to take a more optimistic look into our own role in trying to push for these kinds of changes, such as, for instance, the idea of an ombudsman. It's not really unheard of. In some countries, you have that in, ombudsmen for the military and that. But how can we now incorporate that in our own research and in the policy documents that we write and in our recommendations? Is that something that we should improve? We should include so that there's more oversight on intelligence and to lessen the abuses that we have at the moment. I think that's a good idea that we should be thinking about. Bottom line, intelligence is in a state of flux, and it behooves of us to always be on top and to recommend new ideas to better things on the ground. That's one thing that we should take away. We know we can build on the current introduction of democracy in Africa. We're certainly way better than in we were in the 1970s. I was taking a look at the Tanzanian National Security Act, which was written in 1996. And I'm comparing that with a new country like South Sudan, which is not democratic at all in many respects. But I was surprised to see the contrast in the number of systems for checks and balances that exist on the South Sudan National Intelligence Act, although they're not really implemented, but they exist at least on paper. In contrast, on the Tanzanian side, I didn't see that, and I was very surprised about that. Yet Tanzania is in itself, a democracy and way better than South Sudan in many respects. So that's something to put in mind, as that there's always room to suggest ideas to improve oversight. I also wanted to just touch on something which is like, what the question Anne posed, which is like, how can the United States sort of ensure that the good practices that it has in intelligence are also replicated elsewhere, and that American aid is not used to, it does not perpetuate the kinds of malpractice we see in some in the countries that are allies to the United States in some parts of the world. I think that one avenue that I have seen is the area of security sector reform, where where there is donor aid, and when donor aid is attached to reforming the security sector, the stipulations for oversight and all that do come up from donors actually, and I think that's one avenue to really push for change in the countries that are friends with the United States or allies. I can see that, like in South Sudan, for instance, the drafting of the intelligence paper, the Intelligence Act, and framework and everything was pushed by donors, notably Switzerland, Britain, and the UK. And some of the progressive language that you've seen in the acts that govern the work of the security sector is a result of that, of the donor push. The oversight mechanisms that have been suggested, although they're not functional, but they've been suggested at least, come from that kind of pressure. But there is more to ensure that governments in Africa not just include those in name on the nice pieces of legislation that they have, but the next step is actually to ensure that they are also implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. Sorry, we're running a bit out of time. And I would love to give Ompa and Solomon a chance. Andrew, I know you must leave. Thank you so much. And you have so many good thoughts that we all would love to see on paper. Good luck to you. Orpa, back to you. Ompa, sorry.
Afternoon, thank you very much for that. And please do note that I just have a natural stomach condition. So then please bear with me. So then the key thing that that I'm actually concerned about, and it's actually like in the form of a question as well, because I am relatively new in this academic field of intelligence studies, and I'm basing this on the SAA here in South Africa. So then the main problem that we have is that they are super secretive, and sometimes I think that they are secretive for the wrong reasons and not for the right reasons. So then the problem that we have is the need for balance between being transparent and also, conducting some sort of, COVID ops. So in the academic field, the main question is, how does one navigate, trying to be objective and also to avoid being co-opted by the establishment? If, let's say, you are researching about intelligence analysis, and then the second question that is linked to this is that how does one ensure that they are subscribing to ethical measures? Because in the first session of this seminar, and one of the things that was problematized in terms of intelligence collection methods and analysis, relating to research, was that there's lack of access to information, and this is a continent-wide problem. And then one of the suggestions given was that we should try to use things, such as investigative journalism. But the question lingers around that: how do you ensure that you are subscribing to ethical practices, because the information is not easily available? If you're an academic, you probably need to know someone who's actually practicing in the field. You can't really find accessible information. Most of the information that one would depend on is probably information that has been leaked. But here we don't have much leaks as well, So then that is the major concern that that I actually have. Compared to the US or other countries, you actually have, journals like the CIA. They have a very nice journal that they publish papers there. You actually have declassified reports, like maybe like on a continual basis. But here we don't see that. we do have an ombudsman, but there are many problems, you know. I mean, like for instance, the current one, I mean, he was having a problem with his security clearance with the former director, and then like all those shenanigans. And then the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence also has its own problems. So then there's no proper oversight and all those things. Yeah.
Okay, if I can answer, because I share your frustration on part. It's really difficult. I think from and now maybe some of the other people that have already published, we might need to look at our research methods. And I think in Africa, and we as Africans tend to forget that, is that the oral narratives in Africa is very important for us culturally. And I think it might be worthwhile, Ompa, to think about having interviews with people, and of course your you know, people that have been in intelligence previously in Africa, and make sure that you use proper academic integrity and ethics to make sure that you know, that you would be able to do that. Academic ethics is another big problem, especially here in South Africa, in terms of dealing with personal, you know, people, subjects. It's a nightmare. So I share your frustration, and these are the things that we have to talk about, ways and means to get about it. I don't have easy answers. I don't know if there is anyone else in the rest of Africa that might have a good option, good answers. What worked for you when you started to research the intelligence structures or culture or activities in your countries? What worked and did not make you, as Solomon said, you know, fear for your life? What is actually a research method that really can help on par here? Any comments?
Yes, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thanks, Solomon.
Of course, as researchers and academics, we need to learn our society. We need to first learn our societies. We learn the people we are dealing with. And we may need some methods that allow you to snowballing, kind of friendship, being closer to these people who hold power and who hold the information you're looking for. Of course, somehow I was able to write some few things about the security and intelligence because of my maybe research, my consultancy with some of the agencies, having got a chance. So it is really not open. We need to do friendship somehow to be closer to them, to these organizations. And then you use some snowballing methods. One person will lead you to another, either to another. Something like that. But I want also to comment on what Brian said. Yes, we can witness some changes taking a place in Africa right up from the 90s, opening up and reforming. But my problem is that most of these are really just not functional. We have constitutions, but we are not constitutional. African governments have learned how to dupe the West by coming up with all laws that they talk about. If you come to my country, I think you have a legislation on everything. We have a legislation on everything, but do they work? Are they effective? That is the issue. So, and it goes to what Anna was saying. I think we need to, as this group of scholars in this, we need to join the civil society to clamor for deepening democracy. We do research and find out how do we deepen democracy, first of all, and make sure that people, leaders, respect the laws they put up. Can they walk the talk? We have laws, but these laws are not implementable. They don't bite. We have rule of law, not rule of law, but rule by law. I rather understand that. Rule by law is in Africa. Yes, they use the law to rule you to do this, but the law does not apply to them. So, and they have learned to do that. So whatever we're talking about, all these things of writing or whatever will not happen as long as there's no culture of respecting rule of law and constitutionalism. so that someone knows that, yes, if I write and you challenge me, we can go to court, and I present myself, and I find I've not opened anything. If you read the legislations we have, for example, in Uganda, we have access to information, all those things, but once another law comes in and says the security officers, if you release information, you'll be sentenced to death. So some of those things are there. That's my take, that we must, first of all, think about democratization. Otherwise, all these things we don't want. Because, first of all, by the way, the security sector is not very different from other sectors. All other sectors in Africa, are they working well? I don't think they're working well. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. So in closing, I think we all agree that the complexities are really complex, and that it is increasingly difficult in our African countries to work with academic integrity, to try to instill an ethical culture within our intelligence agencies. There are no easy answers. I think today we've agreed on this. There are also no easy way in which we are going to start to research into this. Because the closer we are to the decision maker, as Barry so eloquently showed us with that model, and this one is that our biases would prevent us then also, then we have a clash between our academic integrity and our intelligence responsibility. So in closing, before I give back to Barry just for a closing remark or two, is and then to Pendile to say that good luck all of you with your studies. We've all been there, and I'm just going to remind you of the image of the little boy in the pond throwing the stone. You are here in this moment for a specific reason, and yes, God bless, and let's try and make Africa work for our children. That is my biggest wish. Over to you, Barry.
There. Okay, I had to push the right button. So thank you. This has been a fascinating couple of hours here speaking to you. I'm very happy to see that there's such a healthy environment of scholars sharing thoughts. I would just make a few observations. When I was talking about being separate like that and not tight like that, I don't mean to say that it is not possible for an intelligence officer to be closely allied with a policymaker, and that it's impossible to do good work that way. It's just much harder to do good work that way. We're all humans, and if we're close to another human being, the temptations to be a human being and give in, especially to strong personalities like presidents, that's a very difficult situation to be in. And also remember the other point that I made was being able to say no to a policymaker or give bad news to a policymaker. If you've got some space, it's possible. It's a little easier to do that if you're closely involved with a policymaker. Giving that policymaker what he or she doesn't want is just humanly harder. And I'm very sensitive. One of you said something about physical courage and moral courage, that you could be executed. I don't think we're there in America. I mean, the worst that could have happened to me is that I would have been released from my responsibilities. I'm 6 years past retirement. There's really nothing horrible that could have happened to me. And I realize that intelligence officers in other countries face much worse than that, potentially. However, the thought I would leave you with is the ethical requirement, although the penalties are different, is still the same. The ethical requirement for intelligence officers to provide objective intelligence. That's what we're here for. Different penalties. And in some cases, to me, all it took was moral courage. Others, it may take physical courage as well. But the ethical responsibility that we have is still there in the end. And I look forward to seeing all of you in IAFI events sometime in the future. That's one place. Oh, that's the other point I wanted to make. In the 70s, when I was going to school in the 1970s, there were no intelligence programs in academia. There was very little information that was available other than the most superficial about even the American intelligence system. It's taken generations to be at the point where we are now, where so much is available, so much is open, so much is there. That came from people moving back and forth from inside the intelligence community into academia, back and forth, and sharing information. It took a long time to develop that. And I think IAFI can help African countries by doing, comparative case studies, sorts of things. We might not have all the information we want on Rwanda, but well, here's how it works in Ghana, here's how it works in Malawi, here's how it works in South Africa, and maybe we can get at the problem together sideways. Let me stop there, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Barry. Very useful and wise words. Belani, over to you.
Okay, well, without much further ado, I don't want to harm too much the amount of time overlap we've had. I mean, it's been a good time overlap. I think everybody was just sufficiently engaged. Apologies for the late start. I know some people had difficulties logging on, but otherwise this concludes our session for now. I don't know if you would have seen in the chat, I did share a open Google Drive link for those of you who haven't seen Barry's documents and readings and presentations. So that is available there. If not, I will still send a follow-up email with that same Google Drive link for all those who will require it. Thank you very much to Barry for making the time. Thank you very much for Dalene for capably steering the conversation. Her background work in the collective is never said out loud, but thank you very much for always playing such a huge supportive role. And to our respondents, I know Andrew probably had to go. Thank you very much. And also to Solomon, thank you very much for always being as enthusiastic as always. So until next week, when we have another very interesting seminar on insurgent intelligence, and we will have two former practitioners presenting at the same time. So it's going to be just as exciting. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.